Greetings, it's the 29th of September 2021 and we now have a plethora of tropical systems to talk about, including two rather curious ones over India. But before we get to India, let's focus in on the Atlantic, where we've got systems in both our North America and Africa sections. Let's start off with Hurricane Sam. Hurricane Sam's intensity has dropped a tad in the last several hours, and it's down to 150 knots, which is a low-end Category 4, still a very major hurricane. And on the cyclone scale, that's a Zeta class. Here's the European Centre model forecast for Sam. And now, unlike before when the GFS and the ECMWF were quite different on their timing and location, they're now in pretty good agreement on the storm going to the east of Bermuda, which is up here where it says Hamilton. And you can see the island avoids the worst of the core of the storm, but we'll get a lot of high waves and possibly some surge. The storm passes closest to Bermuda on Saturday. Here is the Hurricane WRF forecast, and the storm is forecast to maintain major hurricane strength due to passage over warm waters and continued low vertical wind shear. In fact, it should remain a major hurricane until it gets past Bermuda, at which point it will gradually transition to being a post-tropical hurricane force system somewhere out in the mid-Atlantic. My guess is it will lose its hurricane status sometime on Monday, 4th of October. What do you think? Besides Major Hurricane Sam, the National Hurricane Center are also monitoring three other systems in the Atlantic, or should I say, disturbances. Besides Sam, we've got up here the remnants of Peter, and that is probably going to merge in with some extratropical system. And then we've got two disturbances off, which are actually closer to Africa. And so let's shift to the Africa section. Alright then, here we have Western Africa over here. And we've got our two systems. Well, obviously this one to the west is not looking too great. But over here, close to the African coast, this one to the east, this is a tropical cyclone potential development. And typically when I say something has strong tropical cyclone development, I check the latest runs and it's not developing as much as in the previous run. Still, it is getting up there to be at the very least a tropical depression, but that's most likely a tropical storm at that point in the ECMWF at least. And the Hurricane WRF has been run and it seems to like it becoming a tropical storm very quickly indeed. And then it picks up and heads off and it's staying, and then it becomes a hurricane in the model. That's 12Z September 30th. Maintains Category 1 hurricane strength, maybe getting up to Category 2. So the Hurricane WRF does quite like this storm to become a 1 to 2 category hurricane, and then eventually it kills it at the end, which is around October 3rd. At that point it's got to 36 west. I think the reason why the models do kill the storm eventually is that currently the storm heads into high vertical wind shear. Yeah, looking at the winds at 7,000 meters, 400 hectopascals, the storm coming in at, this is the 1st of October, the storm's somewhere in here. It's not very distinct at this level. But there is a large trough that develops in the mid-Atlantic here, and that must be shearing this storm to hell. So that looks like the death of this storm before it becomes a threat in towards the Western Atlantic. But that is a ways off, and right now it's looking quite juicy. A lot of thunderstorms, vigorous thunderstorms over a quite large area. What do you think? Tropical storm within 24 hours or already? Over India we have two clear disturbances, or monsoonal depressions if you like, and they're both quite curious. The western system is former tropical storm Gulab. We were looking at this in the previous video as a potential Arabian Sea cyclone, and guess what? The western system Gulab over here does emerge into the Arabian Sea, and it does intensify in the European Centre model shown here. In fact, it really gathers itself pretty nicely in the model and heads in towards landfall in western Pakistan around Saturday. Meanwhile, going back to the start of the forecast, and we'll look at the second system in the European Centre model. Remember in the previous video this was spinning up into an overland tropical cyclone? Well, now it's still doing the same thing. It spins it up into a tight donut tropical cyclone-esque system that wanders around the Ganges basin, and actually it's really quite similar to the previous forecast. Very unusual looking landphoon type system. We shall see if that happens. Probably more of a monsoonal depression type thing. And finally, let's wrap it up by looking at the West Pacific at this monstrously large Typhoon Mindulle. It's got a huge eye now, and as you can see, my internet connection is so bad now that I can't even load an animation. But anyway, we've got Japan up here. Let's take a look at the forecast. Looks like the Joint Typhoon Warning Center have it at 150 knots, so it's actually the same intensity as Hurricane Sam, but a larger storm. And as the storm comes up, it's got a very large wind field. Approaches closest to Tokyo at 6Z on the 1st, 85 knots. So very stormy conditions for these islands that we highlighted in the earlier video. And I'll wrap this up by taking a look at this eye, because it is huge. This is an earlier in the day Terra Modis image, and if we measure the distance, you'll see, let's say the eye wall's in here, taking it across to the other side, that eye is pretty large, over 100 kilometers, maybe 100, that's like, well, it's very large, as you can see. So on that note, see you in the next one.